наш посол с кем-то встретился. А чего послу делать? Это его работа, он деньги за это получает. Он должен встречаться, обсуждать текущие дела, договариваться. Он что там должен делать? Ходить во всякие заведения, что ли? За посещение которых вас с работы выгонят потом? Нет. Это же его работа. А его обвиняют в том, что он с кем-то встречался. Ну, вы совсем там спятили, что ли? Ну, ничего конкретного. Просто ноль, зеро. Вообще ничего. Удивительно просто. Это просто истерия какая-то. И никак не можете прекратить. Ну, таблетку, что ли, надо дать вам какую-нибудь. Есть таблетка у кого-нибудь? Дайте таблетку туда. Какую-нибудь. Ну, правда, честное слово. Что удивительно.
Таблетка, судя по всему, не поможет. Мегyn Келли, возможно, для яркости дискуссии, возможно, потому что сама живет в американской информационной среде, словно ничего не слышала, и из раза в раз повторяла одну и ту же мысль.
Все 17 агентств по разведке США сделали вывод, что Россия вмешивалась в выборы. Они что, все неправы?
А вы читали эти отчеты?
Я публичную, общественную версию, которая не засекречена, читала.
Публичную, общественную версию. То есть никакую. А кто шил костюм? Нет, карманы хорошо пришиты? Хорошо. Пуговицы хорошо? Хорошо. Есть претензии к пуговицам? Нет, пришито намертво. Но костюм носить невозможно. Такое бывает? Было у одного из наших сатириков, Аркадия Исааковича Райкина. Значит, вот и сейчас тоже вы мне говорите публичную версию. Я читал эти отчеты. Даже в этих отчетах нет ничего конкретного. Вот если конкретно, тогда будет предмет обсуждения. Как в одной организации, в которой я раньше работал, говорили: адреса, явки, фамилии, давайте, где это все?
Но там сотни фактов против России. Там IP-адреса, отпечатки пальцев.
Какие отпечатки пальцев? Отпечатки копыт, скажите, рогов. Чьи эти отпечатки? Значит, IP-адреса, их можно вообще придумать. Знаете, сколько много специалистов? Они сделают так, что это с вашего адреса, с домашнего. Дети ваши послали. Младший ваш ребенок 3-летнего возраста. Так все организует, что это именно ваша девочка 3-летняя совершила эту атаку. Такие специалисты сегодня в мире в сфере этих технологий, что они вам чего угодно придумают, а потом кого угодно обвинят. Это не доказательство. Это попытка переложить с больной головы на здоровую эту проблему. А проблема не в нас. Проблема внутри американской политики. Вот в чем проблема. Команда Трампа оказалась более эффективной в ходе избирательной кампании. Я и сам иногда думаю, ну, перебирает мужик, честное слово. Это правда. Но оказалось, что он был прав, что он нашел подход к тем группам населения и к тем группам избирателей, на которых он сделал ставку. И они пришли и проголосовали за него. А другая команда просчиталась. Признать эту ошибку не хочется. Не хочется говорить, что это мы такие, значит, ну, извините, чего-то не догнали, чего-то не продумали. Легче сказать, что мы не виноваты. Это виноваты русские, они вмешались в наши выборы. А мы хорошие. Это вообще мне антисемитизм напоминает. Во всем евреи виноваты, понимаете? Сам придурок так ничего сделать не может, евреи виноваты. Но мы знаем, что к чему приводят такие настроения. Ничем хорошим они не заканчиваются. Причем здесь русские? Русские, что ли, там занимались этой, значит, кухней протаскивания одного кандидата от Демпартии в ущерб другому? Не мы же это делали, по-любому. Это же они там внутри делали. Прекратите.
Президент Трамп говорил, что он считает, что Россия стоит за этим.
Что говорит президент Трамп конкретно, тоже, дайте мне текстовку, что он сказал, что он победил благодаря, значит, российскому вмешательству, что ли? Я чего-то такого не видел.
Он вышел и сказал: мне кажется, русские сделали это, но больше так не поступят.
Опять, вот ей кажется. Слушайте, это очень серьезные вопросы мировой политики, а вам кажется. Это же не просто, значит, какой-то интервью провести или статью написать в газете. А по поводу вмешательства. Вы посмотрели, чего ваши коллеги у нас делают. Да они просто с ногами забрались в нашу внутреннюю политику, на голову нам сели, ноги свесили, значит, и жвачку жуют. Развлекаются просто. Это систематическое, на протяжении многих лет, грубое, абсолютно бесцеремонное, в том числе даже на уровне дипломатических ведомств, вмешательство прямо в нашу внутреннюю политику. Заканчивайте давайте. И вам легче станет, и нам.
Премьер Моди, Путин сказал, что не вмешивается в дела других стран. Вы верите в это?
У Дадона спросите, он знает.
Вы говорите об Америке, России, Трампе, Клинтон, о таких лицах. Мне не кажется, что нужен такой судья, как я.
Да, не тут-то было. С индусами непросто. Древняя философия. Это мы, люди простые, прямо отвечаем то, что думаем.
Американская телеведущая руководствовалась мудростями американской школы журналистики, когда всех запугали Россией, но все больше и больше интересуются мнением России.
Трамп объявил о выходе США из Парижских соглашений по климату. Европейские лидеры быстро отреагировали, обвиняют его. А как вы к этому относитесь?
Я не отношусь к числу европейских лидеров. Во всяком случае, они так не считают. Вы читали сами эти Парижские соглашения? Нет, не читал, я вижу. Вот сегодня в Москве, говорят, снег даже был. Здесь дождь, холодина такая. Теперь можно все свалить на него и на американский империализм. Что это? Все, они виноваты. Но мы этого делать не будем. Это соглашение, оно же даже не вступило еще в силу. Оно должно вступить в силу с 2021 года. Так что у нас еще есть время, если мы все будем конструктивно работать, мы еще можем о чем-то договориться. Don't worry, be happy.
Уж кто сейчас точно взволнован, так это вся Европа после публичного признания Меркель, что сейчас при Трампе Европе надо рассчитывать только на себя. Канцлер Австрии сегодня продолжил.
Мы такое чувствуем впервые, чтобы американский президент хотел действовать в интересах ослабления Европы. И Европа должна сделать вывод. Есть вещи, которые мы просмотрели.
Не хочется никого обижать, но вот то, что сказала госпожа Меркель, это продиктовано в том числе давно накопившейся такой обидой, уверяю вас, чего бы она потом не ответила, на то, что суверенитет ограничен. И в рамках, кстати говоря, военно-политических союзов он ограничен официально. Там прописано, чего можно, чего нельзя. А на практике это еще жестче. Ничего нельзя, кроме того, что разрешают. Кто разрешает? Начальство. А где начальство? Ну, там, далеко.
Вот эти склоки вокруг НАТО, помогают ли они России?
Помогают ли они России? Ну, в том смысле, что НАТО может развалиться, да, тогда помогут. Но пока чего-то мы не видим развала. Сейчас нет ни Варшавского договора, ни Советского Союза, а НАТО существует. Возникает вопрос, а зачем? Ответ только один. Что бы там ни говорили, это инструмент внешней политики Соединенных Штатов. Если говорить о последней встрече на высшем уровне, то Соединенные Штаты требуют от своих союзников повышения военных расходов и в то же время одновременно говорят о том, что НАТО ни на кого нападать не собирается. А если вы ни на кого не собираетесь нападать, зачем увеличивать военные расходы? Вот говорят о том, что НАТО должна более активно работать, бороться с терроризмом. Мы только что проводили крупную международную конференцию по вопросам безопасности. И очень многие представители с американского континента, из Европы, нам на ухо шепчут. Нас уговаривали в Брюсселе и Вашингтоне не ехать в Россию. Ну это что такое? Вот люди, которые занимают такую позицию, они каким местом своего тела думают?
coming to you live from the moon. The vast loneliness up here on the moon is awe-inspiring, and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. The Earth from here is a grand oasis in the big vastness of space.
Oh my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, is that pretty. You got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color quick.
Oh man, that's great. Where is it?
Quick.
Oh, I got it right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot.
From the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
Dramatic evidence of what's happening to our world, and tonight we'll look at the impact already being felt.
The red flags about extreme weather we've all endured together all across the globe.
We are literally engaged in an unprecedented experiment with the one planet that we know of that can support life.
We will respond to the threat of climate change, knowing that the failure to do so would betray our children and future generations.
The big question mark is the future, of course, and a new kind of normal.
Things are gearing up for the UN-hosted Climate Change Summit in New York. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will host the summit.
I will convene a climate summit for leaders at the highest level. I urge political leaders of the world to prioritize their political energy on climate change.
We have to get serious about bringing real commitments to the table for that summit.
If things go business as usual, we will not live, we will die.
On September 23rd, the United Nations is holding a historic climate summit where they've invited world leaders and heads of state from around the world. We're trying to organize the largest ever climate rally on the streets of New York in response to this, hopefully turning the tide of what comes out of that summit and reshaping what the entire climate movement looks like going forward.
Climate tipping points are scary, but if we stay connected to each other, we can build the largest climate mobilization in history. We'll have power to create the movement tipping point on climate change, the one that takes our leaders from this place of inaction and puts them on a journey towards saving the planet.
All of the big social movements in history have had people in the streets. Women's voting rights, civil rights movement, and even more recently on climate issues, our big successes have happened when people left their homes and went out into the streets.
This is a bigger fight than, in fact, has ever been won. It's not that we need to save the Earth. We need to save the systems that make the Earth compatible with human existence and the existence of other life forms.
This is the fight of our time, but none of us should exactly have to be activists about all this. In a rational world, the fact that scientists had said the worst thing on Earth is happening now, and here's what you can do to stop it, that would have been enough to push our systems into action.
Yeah, of all the things that probably get me most upset, it's when people start presenting climate change as if it's something new. The science behind our understanding of man-made climate change is very, very old and very well established. So the task we've taken on is documenting this history to help us understand where we are, how we got here, and how we can change course. Scientists have known for more than 150 years that carbon dioxide was a greenhouse gas.
Fourier came up with this notion that there were gases in our atmosphere that allowed sunlight to pass through like a window, but then when sunlight bounced off the Earth's surface, they trapped the heat in, right? So you had now this establishment of what we now call the greenhouse effect.
In the 1850s, John Tyndall made laboratory measurements of the absorption of heat radiation by carbon dioxide. And he concluded that if you change the CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to affect the planetary energy balance.
Tyndall was the one who really came along and proved that carbon dioxide was a natural thermostat that helped set our planet's temperature.
In the late 1800s, it was the great Swedish chemist Arrhenius who first did the calculations about what would happen as we, as he put it, evaporated our coal mines into the air. But people didn't pay much attention to that in the 20th century because we were too busy figuring out cool new ways to burn fossil fuel. It was only in the late 1950s that we even bothered to measure to see if it was accumulating in the atmosphere. That instrument, which went up on the side of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, is the most important scientific instrument in the world. Beginning in 1959, it found that there was a steadily accumulating amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, the so-called Keeling curve.
The Keeling curve is one of the most important pieces of scientific work of the 20th century that shows us that carbon dioxide has been rising continuously and systematically since the Industrial Revolution.
Keeling didn't just show that there was an increase in carbon dioxide, he also pinpointed the source. And what Keeling showed so incredibly was that roughly 1 out of every 4 CO2 molecules in our atmosphere today were put there by us.
Just a year ago, we passed 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, the pre-industrial level was about 280 parts per million. So human society in the industrial era has raised the level of CO2 in the atmosphere by about 40%, and many people fear that before we're done, we're going to double it or even triple it.
We're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere at a speed which we have never seen before in modern human history. We are absolutely racing into uncharted territory.
In our lifetime, human beings left behind the Holocene, this 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that coincides with the rise of human civilization. We have crossed a great threshold, and we stand on the edge of others.
I remember when the Weather Channel was this kind of like nice, sleepy little station. Now it's like a horror show. The climate is being disrupted. That's not for next year or 1,000 years from now. That's happening right now.
What all climate scientists will agree on is that the entire atmosphere has changed. All the atmospheric dynamics have changed. So every event that happens now is in the context of climate change, is different from how it would have been.
Typhoon slammed the Philippines with winds of 195 miles per hour. That's higher than the winds from Hurricane Sandy and Katrina combined.
The world is mobilizing to help the Philippines, but just a trickle of food and water and medicine has reached the victims of Typhoon Haiyan.
More than 1 million people were forced to flee their homes, many now trying to salvage what's left.
Hundreds of thousands are thronging relief centers, desperate for life's necessities.
Many residents covered their faces to mask the smell of the dead while they searched for relatives in some of the hardest hit areas.
This is one of the top storms ever seen on this planet.
Mr. President, Your Excellency, what my country is going through as a result of this extreme climate event is madness. Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in my own family's hometown. And the devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses. To anyone outside who continues to deny and ignore the reality that is climate change, I dare them to get off their ivory towers and away from the comfort of their armchairs. I dare them to go to the islands of the Pacific. We refuse as a nation to accept a future where super typhoons like Haiyan become a way of life. We refuse to accept that running away from storms, evacuating our families, counting our dead become a way of life. We simply refuse to. We can fix this. We can stop this madness.
Hello, hello, hello. All right, folks, we know why we're here. We have 80 days starting tomorrow to pull off the largest climate march in history. It's really important for folks to remember that although climate change affects everyone, the impacts are not evenly distributed. And we're asking each one of these breakout groups, prioritize people of color, folks, because this is real, it's disproportionate, and it's time to bring it.
They need to act on a binding global agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. We can do that and create jobs at the same time.
Part of what we're doing is moving people from fossil fuels to the solutions and also presenting them with economic opportunities around the solution.
The idea of who's going to be leading this march are the people in this room.
This environmental issue is the singular issue of our time, of our day, that will determine how we live, where we live, and if we live.
The most important tool that we have is our people power. There are already 325 groups, and that list is going to grow every single day. Whatever you're thinking about doing to help build this mobilization, rethink it and make it bigger, make it bolder. Our job is to make sure everybody hears about it, and then they'll get there. They'll get there. That's our job. In 1982, the UN convened a first special session on nuclear disarmament. And we came together and said, when the representatives of governments all around the world gather in New York City at the UN, we need to be on the streets making our voice heard.
New York City's anti-nuclear demonstration turned out to be the biggest political demonstration in U.S. history.
It was, and still to this date, is the largest single gathering, if you will, of people in this country. I think there was one computer in the office. Everything else was by phone and this thing we called the mail. We now call it a snail mail, whatever. But there was something about that reality that we didn't have the technology that we now have that actually forced people to talk directly to each other.
We have real peace with real justice. We will not go home and be quiet. We will go home and organize.
One of the really interesting things about that demonstration is that some 600 local groups were formed, and many of those groups lasted for years afterwards. To me, the real power of that day was the organizing experience that led up to it, and then the organizing that came out of it.
Some experts are saying now that the whole world is heating up because of a global greenhouse effect.
Scientists had been saying for a long time that climate change might occur, but 1988 is the year when Jim Hansen and his team at NASA say both in the scientific peer-reviewed literature and in public, that it's actually happening.
The changes in atmospheric composition that humans were making was going to have a big impact on the Earth's climate.
The greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
Hansen's testimony was reported on the front page of the New York Times, and there was actually a bill introduced into Congress, the National Energy Policy Act, to immediately begin to phase out the use of fossil fuels in order to prevent disruptive climate change. And of course, that was supported by the creation of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that year. So there was political momentum, there was scientific momentum, there was strong scientific evidence, there was media attention, and then the whole thing kind of fell apart.
The Earth Summit, a 12-day, 178-nation conference on the environment, began today in Rio de Janeiro. Battle lines are already drawn between the haves and the have-nots.
So far, all the agreements are non-binding, requiring no specific action on the environment.
As time has gone on, the scientific warnings keep intensifying, and yet there has been no effective political response. All political efforts to get a handle on this issue have essentially failed.
I am the one that is burdened with finding the balance between sound environmental practice on the one hand and jobs for American families on the other.
The agreement hammered out in Kyoto, Japan, requires industrialized nations to make substantial cuts in greenhouse gas emissions.
The United States actually never ratified the Kyoto Protocol, which is one reason it didn't work.
President Bush ignited a storm of controversy when he decided to abandon the Kyoto Protocol, which sets caps on the emissions of greenhouse gases in developed nations.
For nearly 2 weeks, the U.S. delegation had blocked proposal after proposal, draft after draft, refusing to even discuss mandatory cuts in greenhouse emissions.
Now we switch to the big climate conference going on in Copenhagen.
Today, developing countries made themselves heard.
People are dying.
Led by Africa, 135 nations, including India and China, staged a 5-hour boycott, angry over what they say are insufficient carbon cuts proposed by the world's rich countries.
If Hollywood had been writing the story, you know, it all would have come right in the end, and all the nations would have pledged their best effort. And nothing like that happened. The thing was a fiasco, a failure.
The frustrations of the last 10 days explode on the streets of Copenhagen. Outside the Bella Center, where negotiators still haven't reached a climate agreement, 2,500 protesters try to storm the hall to make an impact.
Nothing happened because the fossil fuel industry was still strong enough to scare nations into avoiding the issue.
What happened in Copenhagen for a lot of people was this realization no leader was coming to save us.
We have to be strong enough to scare our national leaders into doing the right thing in New York City in September. If we can demonstrate that, then better things will happen in Paris than happened in Copenhagen.
These things are not separate moments in time. This is all part of one string, and what we're fighting towards in Paris is highly dependent on what happens in September. This is going to have to be the fight of our lives.
Welcome to this press conference to present the report of IPCC Working Group 3 on mitigation of climate change.
If we really want to bring about a limitation of temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, there is then the need for an unprecedented level of international cooperation.
The way we've approached climate change is the scientific community builds the case, it synthesizes the evidence, it presents that evidence then to the policymakers. We've proven beyond a doubt that climate change is real, that the Earth's temperature is warming, that warming is predominantly caused by the burning of fossil fuels and other human activities, and that additional warming poses a significant threat. What the policymaking community did was they came up with a definition of what they called dangerous human interference.
In 2009, the nations of the world agreed on a target of 2 degrees centigrade or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit of maximum warming above the pre-industrial level. That would require emissions worldwide almost entirely stopping within a matter of decades.
A lot of people talk about 2 degrees being the safe level. Well, there is no safe level. 2 degrees is a round number that would be safer, but we'll still have substantial climate impacts.
1 1 degree is melting the Arctic and the Antarctic. We'd be crazy to find out what 2 degrees will do, but we're probably going to find out. Even if we do everything right at this point, that's about as good an outcome as we can hope for.
The other thing that the IPCC did was that they tied that 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit threshold to the amount of fossil fuels that we can actually burn. And they came up with this red line in the sand, which was 1 trillion tons of carbon.
The problem is that we're already more than halfway there. We're approaching 600 million tons already, and at the rate things are going, we will have completely exhausted that carbon budget within 30 years.
The same leaders who say they want the temperature to go up no more than 2 degrees have put forward a series of proposals that when you add them up leads to the temperature rising 6 degrees. A point past which most sane scientists think civilization on the scale that we now know it will not be possible.
It's almost a kind of refusal to come to grips with reality. There's just this enormous gap between what countries say they want to do and what they're actually on track to do. People call this the emissions gap.
Much of this is about mathematics. You got to leave 80% of fossil fuel in the ground. Fossil fuel industry wants to burn all its reserves. If they do, then we get that 6 degrees.
Each day of inaction, each day of business as usual puts us closer and closer on this crash course.
We're 2 months out from this demo. Obviously, we all know in this room a tremendous amount of work is happening every day, getting the word out, organizing people, mobilizing people. At this point, every day counts. And every day when we miss an opportunity, it's gone.
Because it's not just a one-day march, it's our long-term ability to build a strong climate movement that we need to invest in. So being inclusive to us is really about multiple things, but recognizing that we live in a society where there's privilege, there are inequities. In order to address the climate crisis, we have to first address those inequities. That will allow us to then bring a movement strong enough to address the global ecological crisis.
If you think for a second about this, there was this just layer of stuff under the ground, got put there at a specific time in a specific way, and it just captured millennia of solar energy. And we just happened upon it. It's like if you were just walking around and then like, oh, you put something in the ground, there's just millions of dollar bills down there. You're just like pulling them out. Everything about what we do and who we are and how we live is dependent upon the fact that we just found this stuff sitting there. And that stuff said, oh, you don't have to have everyone working in the fields all the time. You can have cities, you can have cars, you can have iPhones. And the way I view it is, as incredible as that stuff is, we've been paying this price on it the whole time, right? And there's this clock running.
The classic market failure is negative environmental externalities. That's just jargon for you're not paying the full costs of the fossil fuels that you burn.
The racket that the fossil fuel industry has run is to take costs of its product and export them to the public.
Think about, the litany of impacts from sea level rise, ocean acidification, the collapse of ecosystems that we rely on for food, water availability. These things are really expensive. When you have huge wildfires, it costs a lot of money. All of those costs are being dumped onto us as a society and not being paid by people who are polluting.
These big, massive polluters get to dump megatons of carbon in the atmosphere for free. You can't pollute for free. If you litter, you get a fine.
That makes coal and oil and other fossil fuels more competitive against solar and wind and other sources than they deserve to be. Behind the environmental problems that carbon pollution causes and behind the economic problems is a political problem that a very small group of very powerful special interests have exerted very rough control over the political establishment.
We're up against the fossil fuel lobby that has complete access to the political class and the ability to bribe through legal means and blackmail through the use of attack ads and so on. Even people who oppose them have trouble opposing them too strongly because they're in some ways economically dependent on them.
Right now, we have a monopoly control by big carbon polluters. They grant themselves subsidy after subsidy. Think about this. How much money does the Pentagon spend helping big private oil companies get their for-profit products from the Middle East here? About half the Pentagon's budget is just helping Chevron and Shell and Exxon get their for-profit product here. What if they had to pay for that service? How much would gas cost then? Plus, they also get all kind of tax breaks and other kind of loopholes.
They're in a system based on a grow or die ethic. But rather than respond to the climate crisis by scaling back, they're doubling down through fracking, through tar sands oil, through coal exports, mountaintop removal. They have become more brazen.
It's a rogue industry. It's an industry whose business plan is followed to the letter will wreck the planet. Once you know that, then you know that these are now illegitimate business plans. We have to figure out how to disassociate ourselves with them. And that is beginning to happen all over the world.
On the great lawn of Central Park, I was up on a stage probably 70 feet in the air, looking out at that sea of people stretching out farther than the eye could see. The crowd estimates later were larger than 1 million people.
April the 22nd, 1970. The grassroots mobilization, which we recall as the first Earth Day. 20 million Americans called away from their jobs and their classes into the streets of their communities.
When Nixon was looking at television at these huge crowds in city after city after city across the country, he apparently muttered to Ehrlichman, man, a lot of those people have got to be Republican. And Republicans needed him to do something for them on this issue, he felt, and it was Nixon, arguably one of the most anti-environmental presidents in American history, who felt compelled to sign the Clean Air Act.
I think the things that we've been doing to date are a reason to give us a little bit of hope. We've seen a degree of responsiveness on the part of the House of Representatives and on the part of the U.S. Senate.
In a matter of 3 years, we passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, National Environmental Policy Act, the Environmental Education Act, Superfund. I'd go so far as to say that with the possible exception of the New Deal, it was the most fundamental restructuring of the ground rules of the American economic system that the nation has experienced.
All right, folks, we are 50 days away from the largest climate march in history. Are y'all ready? Yeah! This is not just about the environment. It's about the community. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about justice.
It was labor that got this city up and moving.
Yes.
Yes. And it'll be labor that continues to move this city. We are the community. Are we not the community?
Yeah. For our people who have been at the front line, not being able to breathe, suffering from asthma, upper respiratory, pulmonary disease, cancer clusters because of environmental racism.
Climate change exacerbates every kind of social injustice that faith communities have fought against for thousands of years. And we will not stop marching and praying and acting until we have a strong climate treaty.
We got a movement, brothers and sisters, and we got to stay together.
So join us on the 21st to march and send that signal to the United Nations.
The people united will never be defeated. The people unidos jamás serán vencidos.
It's only by accident that we even think of climate change as an environmental issue. You could just as easily think of it as another example of what happens in an unequal society. The people who've contributed the least to climate change and who've benefited the least from the use of fossil fuel are the first people to feel the effects. People in the poorest parts of the world suffer enormously already and will suffer enormously more as the century wears on.
Climate disruption is a social justice issue. Who gets hit first and worst every time there's one of these weather disasters? It's low-income people, it's people of color, it's people who can't get out of harm's way, and people who can't bounce back easily because they don't have the money or the social standing or the political connections.
Our communities are disproportionately impacted. We're all seeing that it's the indigenous people, the people of color, the low-income people who have historically suffered the burden of so many other politically driven crises.
There are so many countries that have been systematically plundered over hundreds of years, and this is often described as an ecological debt, climate debt. The whole idea that there are disposable places was always a racist idea, the idea of sacrifice zones, just treating people in places like garbage.
The place where it's hardest for it to sink in is in the suburban United States. We're insulated against the natural world. That's what the suburbs really are, a way of making you not notice the natural world very much. And we're insulated in those places by wealth. At least we think we are.
Scientists are screaming from the rooftops about us avoiding going over a 2-degree rise in the temperature of the planet. Why are they so worried about that? If we go over that amount of warming, there are feedback loops in our ecosystems, tipping points that climate change could spin out of control, and it happens like that.
There are switches that can be tripped where suddenly you are in brand new territory